Edulastic for Math, part of our Fall 2021 Teacher Talk series. We're so glad to have you here joining us this evening or this afternoon, depending where you're joining us from. We have a great panel of math teachers that will be sharing how they use Edulastic in their math classroom. And we'll also provide some great tips for you to bring back to your own classroom. And now for the moment you've been waiting for. We're so lucky to have with us tonight 3 wonderful math educators. They'll be presenting on how they use Edulastic in their classrooms. Each of them has actually already presented in a previous Teacher Talk webinar this fall. First up, we have Melissa Rothe. Melissa is a 6th to 12th grade math teacher from North Dakota. She's going to discuss graphing and scaffolding questions in Edulastic. Melissa, I'm going to invite you to turn on your camera and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. I started using Edulastic last year when I was in a hybrid situation, and I really enjoyed using it with the math capabilities that it had and the graphing things I could do. So I pulled a whole bunch of different examples that I have used in the last couple weeks, and I know there's a lot more out there on the capabilities of the graphs on Edulastic. So in this one, they're just looking at adding integers, and then they drag and drop those values on the left onto the number line where the correct answer would be. Last year, I created a question, and that was a chore, but I eventually figured it out. And I created this question because I couldn't find anything to do a 2-variable inequality. And so I found out quickly that I could put the 2 different lines on there, and the kids could decide between the lines whether it was solid or dotted, and then they could graph the solution set. So I have walked through that process on here. So the students would go and select the line that they want, the solid or the dotted. And if you go to the next slide, they would graph that on the coordinate plane, and then they would have to decide where the solution set would be. And after they do that, they click on solution set and they click on the left or right hand side that they would like to be shaded. Next slide, please. And so here, Edulastic is great because it would be able to grade this, and you can set up different methods of grading. So if you want alternate, if they had chosen the wrong line segment, you could give them half the points. If they had chosen the wrong side of the graph, you could choose some alternate ways of grading. And so it was an easy way, once I got it set up, for Edulastic to do all my grading. And I just had to look and see where the student misconceptions were. From this, then I created a little bit more complex graph on the next slide. And so I had 2 inequalities. And so I had double the lines and the solution set. And so students were able to graph this and choose where they overlap. Next slide, please. So it would look like this, and I was able to see this whether my students were in class or distance, and it really helped me to understand what the students knew and what they didn't know, and I didn't have to look at pictures of their homework and things like that. I have not used Edulastic for assessments. I've primarily used it for homework, but I have students are able to learn this software pretty quickly, and I really enjoyed that part of Edulastic. The other type of graphs that I have used is the ones like this, where they have to translate the triangle, either I use it in my 8th grade curriculum or in my geometry. And so students are able to draw that out online, and they can check their answer if you have an premium account with Edulastic. Some pros and cons with graphing is students are able to make fairly complex graphs, and there are many different types of graphs available. They're easy to access, especially when you have remote students. But I have found a couple formatting errors. Sometimes the student's answer looks almost identical to the answer key, and it is counted incorrect. So I have had to go back and manually override those. And then I have also found it a little bit tricky to create, but there are plenty of answers or questions and tests already created in the banks. The other type thing I wanted to talk about today was scaffolding. I have found that the scaffolding on Edulastic is awesome for kids who just need a little bit more help. I typically throw 2 or 3 of these types of questions in any one of my assignments. And so here they ask them for the y-intercept and the slope before they ask for the equation of the line. Another example would be looking at what your starting value is on an exponential equation before you go into writing your equation, and then before you have to evaluate your equation. So it takes a question and it breaks it into multiple parts. And so kids can figure it out step by step instead of just asking the last question. So here you can also do it when you are looking at linear or exponential. And this one used drop boxes instead of just text boxes. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. I have really enjoyed the proofs in geometry. It's my first year teaching geometry. And so the next slide, please. So this just being able, the kids don't have to come up with the reasons, but they just drag it and drop it into the boxes. It has really helped just so that students can get to know a proof instead of just having them create it from scratch. A few other examples that we just went over recently. Here they have drop down boxes for A, C, and D, whereas B they have to write in the equation. Next slide. They're asking for the slope of the line given and then the reciprocal, the negative reciprocal for step 2, and then the equation. And I love that Edulastic understands math and it knows that point slope form is the same as slope intercept form and equivalent equations. There is a box to click if you do not want them to understand, or if you want a student to type it in a particular form. In one of my 7th grade classes this last week, we did the next example where they had to identify the steps before they solved it. And then the last one is more of a 2-way table in statistics. The next slide, please. And so there's multiple questions here and there's multiple blanks, and it's able to ask multi-part questions. Pros for scaffolding questions on Edulastic: students for the most part are more successful if they understand what each part is asking. Sometimes the wording might not be as clear as they need it, or they're not interpreting the question the same. Students tend to slow down more and spend more time on these questions. As I look at my graph and I assess just how long they're spending on it, they are spending a lot more time. And it can happen in many different ways, whether it was the drop down boxes, the drag and drop, the multiple choice, and things like that. Sometimes it can be a little tedious for some of my high flyers that find these questions difficult to understand because they're like, I already know how to get to the answer. I just want to get there. And sometimes it's so many blanks, so there's a lot of points, and not every question needs to be scaffolded. So that is kind of what I just wanted to talk about, and some of the things I really enjoyed using with math and Edulastic. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Melissa. That was great. I love how you use the multi-step questions for scaffolding, just so that you could definitely see the process rather than just getting to the answer. What a wonderful idea. Next up, we have Celias Castellanos. Celia is a linked learning instructional coach in California. Prior to stepping into this new role this year, she was a lead math teacher for over 9 years. Celia is going to discuss using Edulastic for 21st century assessments. Celia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And the first thing I do want to mention is that my journey with Edulastic, and I do want to call it a journey, my journey with Edulastic did start around 5 years ago when I was looking for a tool that would allow me to make my math exams more like the SBAC in order to give my students that experience. Can we go to the next slide, Lauren? And in doing that, I've learned a lot of different things. One of the things that I learned and was able to use this previous year was that Edulastic really allowed me to take tasks that I really love to do in the classroom that were based off of our curriculum. We were using the college preparatory mathematics curriculum and create digital performance tasks out of them. Providing students a variety of different question types and allowing for immediate feedback. In the video that you guys see, there's a little check answer box that allowed students to go ahead and click to see if their responses were correct. Here's another example of the drag and drop that Melissa was talking about. This one is at a 7th grade level where students are identifying which statements hold true for each type of graph in order to see which one's a proportional relationship and which one is not, and to see if they are understanding that. So really allows for that immediate feedback for students and also to check students' understanding with more than just a multiple choice question. Can we go to the next slide? And with that, with my team, my math team, something that we were really working towards is having common assessments, and not just any type of common assessment, but a rigorous common assessment. And Edulastic was allowing for that because, like Melissa showed, it automatically goes ahead and allows you to grade graphing questions, tables, equations, to break things down in order for you to really assess students' thinking with the scaffolds. And on the data side, it allows teachers to really go into the data and dig deep into the data in a quick, easy manner. We were able to go ahead and look at aggregate information per class, per question type, per subgroup, by standards. Subgroups, you have to upload some information to be able to use, but all the other ones we were really able to use and inform our teaching based on this data, amazing data that we were able to get. Can we go to the next slide? And these are some of the lessons that I learned throughout my journey with Edulastic. I am definitely not at the same point with Edulastic as I was 5 years ago. When I first started using it, I was looking for those SBAC type of tests. And I really was using the item banks and the assessments that are already created. One of the things that I've loved is that in that time, Edulastic has gone ahead and partnered with a lot of different groups and entities, including groups like the SBAC, and uploading official forms of like the SBAC recommended questions, and they're there already easy to use for me to use them as a pre-assessment, as a practice for students, or however else I need to use them. And this gives students a true opportunity to practice those digital skills on different types of online or computerized assessments before getting to that standardized assessment. Something that I saw in my classroom a lot was that some of my 7th and 8th grade students were getting some questions marked wrong because they were simply not typing things incorrectly. For example, and the one that really baffled me was some students, instead of using the letter X on the keyboard, they were using the timetable symbol from the keypad, the number keypad. And yes, that was marking their responses incorrect. During that early phases, it took a lot of time on my part to go ahead and double check that. But at the same time, it helped me see that there were learning opportunities for my students that weren't necessarily the math that they needed to have, so that they wouldn't make those mistakes when it came to the SBAC. It also helped me increase transparency with my students, because it helped me reach them where they were at, to motivate them if they needed to. I made it a practice to usually go ahead and project the live view, the live teacher view, while students were taking an assessment. So students, I did have students that would check to see if they were getting little red boxes or little green boxes or little yellow boxes, and they knew what that meant, and that helped them to go ahead and motivate them to continue to work on certain questions that they might have made a small little error on. It also, in terms of the data, helped me have better conversations that encourage growth mindset with my students, because I was able to show them their improvement, where they started off at the beginning of the year, where they ended up in the middle of the year, and also I had my students for 2 years, so where they were at the following year. And that improvement was very important for my students to see.
Thanks, Celia. That was great. It's definitely interesting to get how students get accustomed to different resources, and I'm glad you're able to get them accustomed to using the online platform before their state testing, using that X versus the multiplication sign. And last but not least, we have Barbara Zingg. Barbara is a high school math and computer science teacher in West Virginia. She's going to discuss how to use Edulastic to personalize content, create district and school-wide resources, and more. Without further ado, Barbara, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. I feel like I have the best spot of the evening because I'm like the cleanup hitter. And so I can sort of dovetail off some of the other things that people have said. Melissa mentioned how much time students are spending on questions. You can see that really easily. If you're looking at your class board, you can see how much time they're spending, and that besides the ones they're getting wrong and the ones they're getting right, you can see which questions are taking the most time. So that gives you some insight as a teacher. Next slide, please. All right, one of the things, Melissa was also talking about scaffolding, and I use that as a form of differentiation. She was talking about sometimes our high flyers get bogged down with all the scaffolding that they may not need. So recently I've started making multiple assessments based on different groupings within my class. For example, we were doing graphing linear functions, and some of my kids could do it, fine. They didn't need that scaffolding. They didn't need me to break down and say, what's the slope, what's the y-intercept, to give those sort of built-in prompts. So I created 2 assessments, one for the kids who had a higher level of mastery and one for the kids who needed the scaffolding. I made them the exact same points to make my life easy when I was grading them. I also named them very similar names. So if a student's sitting next to somebody and they look at the name is similar. So it's not like, well, I have the dummy version. They felt like they had the same version and they same content, and they did. It's just some of them had some extra little scaffolding built in. Another thing that you can do to customize and make it personal is if you have students who have IEPs or 504 plans that say you can only have 3 choices on a multiple choice or something. That's really easy to do on Edulastic, a lot easier than to going through a paper test and whiting out questions. It's just much easier to do to make it fit where the student's mastery level is. And I'm sure that we're all struggling with COVID issues, with kids being quarantined, with kids who were in school and out of school and hybrid and virtual and all those things. And so I'm finding this year more than ever that the range of my students' abilities is much wider than it ever has been before. And this ability to custom make an assessment that fits the specific needs of a group of students has been really wonderful. Another thing that I do to make it personal is somebody else talked about the feedback they get, the immediate feedback they get. I like to give personalized feedback to the students as a way of talking to them. And when I do the feedback, I speak to them by name. I say their name, and then I say things like, do you remember when we did this? Or be sure to look at this, or go back to your notes and find the definition of this. And I've created a sheet that has the question, it has a space for the question number, has a space for the question, has a space for the teacher's comment, and then a space for what they redid, how they changed it. And I use that when I redirect tests for assessments for students. I do all my assessments now through Edulastic, even though I'm face-to-face. And it has some really nice features in being able to scramble the answers, scramble the questions, lots of things to keep students from being dishonest. We are one-to-one, and there's a lot of them learned how to cheat really well last year, which is a horrible thing to say. But when you have software like PhotoMath and MathWorks, and they can have access to that, these built-in things that Edulastic has come up with that warn you if the student goes off the website or shuts them down if the student goes off the website. Those are really wonderful features. Next slide, please. District and statewide resources. Somebody also talked about creating common assessments. The Edulastic has been wonderful about uploading the West Virginia standards. Now, I don't know about anybody else's state, but in the state of West Virginia, teachers are prohibited from using the words Common Core. It says in education code, students are prohibited from using that. As ridiculous as that is, because our standards are almost word for word, but they are very responsive if you want them to upload your standards. So now everything that I do, I can just adjust the standards very easily to West Virginia standards. And so then there's no issue there with me using the forbidden standards. I try to make the titles of my assessments easy for my colleagues to find. I start them all with WV. So when I'm in contact with other people in my state, if they want to look for something I've created, if they just search for WV, they're going to come up for West Virginia things. And I think share. And I share Edulastic all the time. I am talking to people not only in the math department, but the science is getting more robust, and I'm working on getting the science teachers on board. Last year, when some of the teachers and I were 100% virtual, some of the English teachers got on board. It is so flexible and so adaptive and so usable. And I've been using Edulastic for about 5 years, I think. And I came upon it during one of my master's programs, and I was looking at a website, and it was the 10 best software, the 10 best apps. And I literally just stumbled upon it. And in the years I've been using, it has been so responsive to what teachers have said. Teachers have said, could you make it do this? Or could we have the ability to see this? Or it would help us if we could drill down and see standards mastery. And Edulastic is in a constant state of evolving and developing and meeting the needs of what teachers say and being pretty upfront about what they're doing and what they're sharing and what the new stuff is happening. And and responsive when you have a question. And I think that's amazing. Next slide. I think I have one more. All right. So different people have different ways of making out an assessment. I'm still fairly new to creating my own questions. I have done some. I have a colleague who creates all his own. He says, I can't be bothered with searching for questions, which that's his philosophy. What I do is I do a big search for questions by standard or by topic. I have a crossover sheet that says this standard in Common Core is equal to this standard in West Virginia. So I can search by the standards. I can search. I have some favorite creators that I use. And I come up with, maybe I'm looking for a 20 question assessment or something. I find 50 questions I like. And then I go through and I say, well, this one would be good for my high flyers. And maybe this one would be good for my on level ones. And then this one might be good for my below level ones. So in casting that big net, in finding a big assortment of questions, I find questions that meet the needs of all my students. And so I create those assessments separately. And I might make a subtitle for them of A, B, and C, just for me to know what I'm doing. So then I take the test myself at least 3 times. The first time I do it to make notes. Okay, this question doesn't use the exact wording that I use, and so I need to edit that. Or this question is a little confusing, I need to edit that, or I need to change that, or maybe I even need to drop that question. And so then I customize these questions that I found to make them match my style and my language. If I know I've just really hammered on coefficient, what's the coefficient of such and such? I'm going to make sure that that word is used in the question. And if you're not finding a question that meets your needs, which is hard for me to believe since there's such a robust bank of questions, but if you are, creating your own question to get exactly what you want is not a hard process. There is a learning curve, but it's not hard to do. And so if you know you want a specific question, or you want one of these active tasks or one of these performance tasks that are so popular right now, you can easily create them in this format that then saves you a tremendous amount of time in grading. And once you've created it, it's there, it exists, and you can combine it with different things next time. You're going to have a totally different mix of students every time, even from class to class. And it's all customizable, which is just, I mean, it is so flexible and it is so usable, and it is just by far, and I've been teaching for 27 years, this is by far the best tool in my toolbox. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Barbara. That was great. And we love obviously getting some positive feedback on Edulastic 100%. I love that you give those comments and make it personal, addressing them individually or making sure that they refer back to a specific lesson. And I also love your idea about customizing questions that are already available in the test bank, giving it your own little twist. It's certainly, I'm sure, helpful for those students as well. And before we jump into Q&A, I just want to say thank you again to all of our presenters for joining us today for their wonderful presentations. This event certainly couldn't have been done without all of you. You took so much time to create your presentation as well as join us to present it live. So once again, thank you so much for your wonderful insight to your instruction with Edulastic in your classroom. And now we're going to open it up to questions. So please feel free to write any questions you have in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to bring them up with our presenters. One question I had that came up, since I don't see any questions yet, how did you feel that I invite you also to turn on your cameras while we're having this discussion. How did you feel was getting your students accustomed to using Edulastic for math? I'm sure with something like ELA, using a reading passage or typing an essay in, it's a little easier, or multiple choice, than showing your work. And we saw Melissa's step-by-step on how she does those graphs and how she does showing the step-by-step work for the students. But I think it's a wonderful idea. How did the students feel it was using Edulastic for math?
I had some students who had a little trouble at the beginning with the graphing, because you grab the line and they put it down at the y-intercept and it automatically puts a line. And they would say, oh, okay, that's the line. No, that's not the line. So we did a couple of activities together where I said, okay, this is how you do this. This is how you use this. This is like a tool. This is how you use this tool. And once you've shown it to them once or twice, then they've got it, you know. And it's like any tool. And like Melissa was talking about putting that time symbol instead of the X. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. And simply, like if they needed to do a fraction, the little keyboard pops up and then there's an arrow on the side, but they don't think to click on the arrow to extend the keyboard. But once you show that, okay, you want to write a fraction, here's the way you do that. You want to write a number with an exponent, here's the way you do that. And it's interesting, these are digital natives supposed to be, but my students are very timid about clicking on things. And so I've had to say, if you can't find what you are looking for in the screen, click on something, see where it is. So I found that just with a little help on how it's laid out and the options are, has been very helpful.
I guess just like anything, it takes time to get used to. Once you model it and they get the hang of it, more practice makes perfect.
Absolutely.
And I was going to add, I definitely, the first year that I used Edulastic, it was the hardest, but I think it was because I didn't expect some of the little technical difficulties that students were having. And then after that, I kind of knew them and I was able to anticipate them and teach my students what they were beforehand, and not wait until a pandemic went ahead and forced me to teach them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say it that way. But yeah, there were a lot of little things that I realized technically that it was kind of like a wow in my face where, oh my God, some of my students might be getting really low scores on the SBAC, not because they don't know the concepts, but because they're struggling with the technology. So it made me go ahead and make a mental note of what were, like, do they have access to a calculator on this type of question on the SBAC? Giving them access to that calculator, making sure that I give them access to the scratch pad and having them learn how to use it. What Barbara just mentioned, that they understand how to type in a fraction, not just the multiplication symbol. And there's so many small little things, but those technical difficulties for students made a world of a difference.
And like you mentioned, mimicking that on the test prior to the state test is so important and it's so impactful on their scores. When they're just thrown into a test on the computer without any familiarity with any of the tools up in front of them, I think the stress leans more onto getting used to the technology versus getting used to the actual questions being asked. So you bring up great points talking about the state testing there.
I also think it lends to the math practice of paying attention to details. There are a lot of times that they would have something right, but they're missing a negative or they're missing, and they do it on paper too, but online, especially if you have the premium and you're able to have the check answer button for those kids, they're like, why am I getting this wrong? And it's because they forgot a sign or they typed something just a little bit incorrect. And so it's paying attention to detail and just looking over their work. Okay, did you do everything correct, but did you mistype something or did you type the wrong number? The number of times they have typed the wrong number, it amazes me every single time. They put a 2 instead of a 3 and they're like, I'm getting this wrong. And I'm like, well, did you mean for this to be a 2? And they're like, no, I wanted a 3. And I'm like, well, you didn't type that here. So sometimes just the obvious things that you don't think about or they don't think about when they are looking at that.
I'm sure Barbara and Celia can relate to that story. I see them nodding their heads.
Yeah, but I mean, it forces them to be close readers also. You know, you have a question that says, which one of these does not do X, Y, and Z? You know, and that's the kind of thing that can make a big difference on an SAT or, you know, a test that has a lot of impact on their futures. So if you can train them to be close readers of questions, you know, at this stage, that's very helpful.
100%. I don't see too many other questions coming in the chat, so I'm just going to actually see. Looks like they've been answered. So I'm just going to turn it over and see if you guys have any parting words before we close out tonight's session.
Well, my
last minute tips
is always tell everybody about Edulastic. Tell everybody, even people that might not be in your content area, people that, because teachers are pushed to the max right now. So anything that you can do, I'm sure in your districts, like in my districts, There's no substitutes, there's no cooks, there's no custodians, there's no bus drivers. Anything that you can do that would help lighten the load a little bit, you know, for teachers. And they don't even know this exists unless we tell them this exists. So that's I'll get off my soapbox now.
Spread the word. We love it.
That's right.
Well, and adding to that, I do a lot of work to get the assignments up and all that kind of stuff, but I don't have to spend hours grading. So there's a lot of preloading, but then after that, I just go take those scores, I enter them into my gradebook, and I'm done, and I move on. I look at some data, and it's all right there. I don't have to do anything afterwards, because the last thing math teachers want to do is sit down and grade 100 papers every night.
And just to add to what Melissa just said, it's a lot of preloading the first time you create that assessment or task. The second time around, it's there. You might need to fine tune something that you notice, oh, this didn't work exactly the way that I intended. I need to make the small little change, but you don't have to preload it again the following year. It's already there for you.
Yep, that's great. We love recycling our resources and sharing amongst other educators. So we encourage everyone to stay in touch on our social media. Tag us in your posts, tag us with any questions or feedback you have. And thanks again for joining us today.